Hey guys, it's been a little while since I did my last video. This one's going to be purely based on NSX-E, or rather the new vSphere or vCenter integration with NSX-T. So let's cut to the chase and get started. So first I want to show you the two ways of actually being able to get these files. So if you go to the VMware download page, you've got the option of doing the OVA, which is pretty standard, or you've got the new OVF vCenter plugin files. So you've got the OVF, the cert file, and so on. I'm going to be using the OVF files, and I'll explain why. If you were to use the standard OVA, your UI experience is slightly different, and you're going to be missing one of the critical options that the OVF file gives you, as well as that OVF format will actually make your UI experience a lot more seamless and cleaner. So I've already pre-downloaded these files, as you can see here. So let's go ahead and start the deployment. So if I jump into my vCenter, I click on the menu and go to NSX. Then I'll click on Install NSX. I'll go to Local File and hit Upload. Select all those files. Hit Next. I will call this Impactor. Select the compute name and folder, and then next page is Compute Resources. And then I'll make sure all the details are correct on the next page. And it looks all fine to me. I'll hit Next. I'm going to deploy a medium-sized appliance, up to you what you choose to deploy in your environment. So I'll hit Next there. I'm going to select my vSAN data store. And here's the management network I'm going to put it on. And there's a bunch of options here. I'll pre-fill all of these, and then I'll quickly run through this, so that way you can see what the UI experience looks like with the OVF file compared to what you would have seen with the old school or the other OVA file. Okay, I've pre-filled everything. So if you recall, if you've ever deployed using the OVA, you'll remember that there were 3 sets of passwords that you had to fill in. So you'd have the system root password, you'd have the audit, and you'd also have, I'm pretty sure it was the admin account. But if I scroll through here, I've only got the 1 set of passwords for the root user. I've got to fill out the host name, which is Impactor in this case, and then the network details, which is all pretty standard. You can't really get around that. Then DNS, pretty standard again. NTP is also pretty standard. Then at the end here, you'll see reverse proxy HTTPS port. This is important because if you use the standard OVA to do this exact same deployment, which you can, there's nothing stopping you. One, you'll have a bunch more options that you need to fill, and the experience is not as good, but you also don't get the option to fill out the reverse proxy HTTPS port. This is important because when you actually try to, or when that compute manager is integrated with NSX-T, it registers the port as 443 using this, but if you use the OVA, it registers as at 0. So the issue with that is, if you ever go to try and update the compute manager for whatever reason, and there is a reason for that, why I would do that, and I'll show you that later in this video. But if you do use the OVF, you'll have 443, which will allow you to edit it. But if you use the OVA, it will register the port as 0, which means anytime you go to edit that compute manager, it will say you can't because the port is set to 0 and it's not valid. And if you try to change it, it's grayed out. If you try to do it via CLI or API, it just won't let you do it. So you're kind of stuck with trying to modify the compute manager after the fact. So I'll hit Next on this and hit Finish. Okay, we can see now that OVF file deployment process is now complete. And you'll see in the task list down below that there are several deploy and install or plugin solutions type of tasks. And what that is doing the integration between vSphere and NSX, or vCenter I should say. And that also adds a mob entry and so on, as you would normally do for a plugin. Let me quickly show you that. So if I go into the menu, go to Administration, then we go to Plugins. It's loading. Okay. We can see here, NSX-T Manager version 3201 is what we want. And if I go into, let's go to the mob. Oop, can't type. All right, so if I jump into, if I expand the extensions, we can see here we've got this extension here, and clarifies the version 3201. That is what was just configured. All right, now back to vCenter and menu NSX. Now we can start onboarding. So this is essentially enabling it essentially. All right, so we need to add a license key in. And once that's added, it'll take you to the options that we have with this plugin. So we've got two modes: security only, which means no logical routing essentially, and just using NSX-T for security only. And virtual networking is the other way around, where it doesn't enable any security groups, distributed firewalls, anything off the bat, but it doesn't preclude you from doing so, but it does instantiate the logical routing for the gateways, edge clusters, and so forth, and also allows you to create a segment at the end of the process. So we'll start with security only, and we'll walk through the process and what's involved, and then we'll move on to virtual networking. All right, let's get started with the security only deployment. So to do so, jump into the menu, click on NSX, which will bring you back to this screen even though I was already on it, just wanted to show you. And then we'll click on Get Started. And the first page is selecting the compute cluster where you'll want to deploy the security only mode, or for the nodes you want to select for it. I've only got one cluster, so I'll pick that one cluster. I'll click on Install NSX, and then it prompts you with a warning, sort of basically about VDS versions and how it needs to be 6.6 or higher. I'm good as I've got vSphere 7, so I'm going to click on Install. Okay, so that kicks off. We can see that it's installing on the side there. And if we expand that out, we'll see all the nodes having VIBs uploaded to it. That's cool. Now, if I jump into NSX, if I hit refresh on here, we can now see in NSX that it's also being applied. And if you really wanted to, you can even putty onto one of the hosts and have a look at the logs, tail them, and watch the install process complete. So I'll let this finish, and then we can continue on. Okay, we can see now that the VIBs have been installed on the host. As you can see there, it says prepared. And if I go back into NSX Manager UI, it says they're all successful. I'll ignore that unknown for a second. If I hit refresh, it should come good. Yep, there we go. There we go. All right, so I just want to reiterate that because this is the security-only model or deployment mode, there would be no TEPs on the host because it doesn't need to do NSX-T logical routing. It'll just do it all on VLAN backed. And in order to confirm that, I'm going to quickly putty onto one of the hosts and confirm that. So if I log on to all right, so I generally find out if there are any TEPs on a host by running this command. Cool. All right, so generally VMK 1011 are where your TEPs are, and as we can see there, we have no IPs. They're just 169 addresses. So we can confirm that there are no TEPs on these hosts, or actively configured TEPs, I should say. All right, now if I go back, I hit next, and this is where you start creating the core or the base foundations of your microsegmentation for the security-only model. So for starters, we're going to be creating an infrastructure group, and as you can see here, it's for DNS, NTP, and AD, and whatever else you want to configure the group for. I'm going to keep this simple in this example and just do one for DNS. So I will select DNS, define the group. I'm going to use IP address because the destination or the VM where DNS is actually running sits external to NSX-T. So I will quickly do that. Here I'll type in the address, and that should do it. Cool. And I'll save that. All right, so I'll hit next, and then you can define your environment group. So your standard environment type mechanism. So you've got production, development, and so on, or whatever it is in your environment. I'll just do dev in this case. So I'll define the group. I'm just going to pick something at random, so I'll pick this VM. Okay, cool. So what this will end up doing is it creates the development environment, it gives it a group name. I've added the one member so far, and it creates a tag. And we'll confirm this once this finishes deployment. So I'll hit next. And similarly to what we've just done, you then add application groups. I won't actually add an application group, but I'll just quickly hit this, and we'll see what we've got to deal with. Okay, so again, group name, you can pre-configure a tag, you can define it via IP address, or you can even select a distributed virtual port group to attach or add as part of this application group, which is new, which is a bonus to be doing the security only model or running 3.2. So I'll hit cancel on that and bin that. And I'm going to skip that one, and I'll hit next. And now you basically define the flow or the microseg rules. So this is going to be your basic DNS. I'm going to keep this as default because it's going to be any to the DNS group, or in this case, the one IP that I defined. I'll hit next. I'm not going to bother with the environments, but this is where you configure the environments that can communicate with whichever groups that you will end up creating. And next, and then the default action either allow or deny, depending on what your stance is. If you want to start with the allow and then flip it to deny, you can, once you know how much traffic is actually being hit in those any or the default rules. So I'll hit next. And this is a summary of everything that's going to be created. And if I hit publish, that should now push that all. Okay, cool. So now it says done. If I click on that, it takes us to the NSX UI through the vCenter integration. So to see what we've just done, if I go to inventory and groups, there's that DNS infra group that was just created. And if I click on view members, let's confirm that it is the same one. Cool, IP address, and that's what I entered. That's cool, we know that worked. Now if I go into security and distributed firewall, let's have a look and see what we've got here. So we've got one in environment, which should be what we've just created. Yep. So we've got the development rule, any to development group. So that was one. Cool. That looks familiar. And then if I go to infrastructure, the DNS rule should be in here. And there it is. Awesome. So the security only model worked. And to also further confirm that there are no TEPs on these hosts, if I go to Fabric nodes, there should be a transport node profile attached to the cluster. Anytime you do a deployment, even if it's security only or the networking option, it will attach a transport node profile and prepare all hosts with the same transport node profile. So let's have a look here. So here it is saying it is using this transport node profile. Cool. All right. So if I go into profiles, transport node profiles, edit, I'll click on it. Won't let me edit it. Okay, so we can see here that it's got only the VLAN transport zone. Okay, cool. So that's one indication that there won't be any TEPs. But if I also go to nodes and try to edit one of the nodes. Okay, let's see what it's got here. All right, so it won't let me edit it for some reason. But we can also see that there is no tunnels up and there are no TEP addresses assigned to the host. So that sort of proves the point. And now if I also wanted to quickly show you something here. So if we go into segments, you'll see now that we've also got the distributed port groups instead of just the NSX segments. And this is where you can now apply policy or use the DV port groups or distributed port groups in your microseg. So you don't have to just use NSX VLAN back segments, which is a huge bonus. So you can leverage or you can you can create microsegmentation rules based on existing port groups. You don't have to convert them to NSX VLAN back port groups or overlay for that matter. Okay, so that wraps up the security only model. I want to then move on to the networking option. So let's do that. Okay, so I stopped recording so I could remove all the stuff that we deployed for security only model. and bring it back to this, bring it back to a fresh start. So now I'm going to try clicking on virtual networking so we can walk through that process. So go to get started, same sort of thing, prep the cluster, but this time it asks you to select a VDS. So I'll pick the one that's already been prepped on the hosts, or when we built out vCenter in the cluster. I'll hit next. So first it asks you for a VLAN for the host tips. So this would be in my lab 2001. And it's also asking you to create the pool now. You could either do that or use DHCP. In my example, I'm going DHCP, but feel free to carve out a pool if that's what you want to do. So I'll check DHCP here. Then I'm going to select prepare cluster. And then we'll click on prepare. Cool. And similarly to what it did when we're doing security only, it goes and installs the VIBs, but this time it will also create TEP IP addresses or TEP interfaces on each of the hosts. So we can monitor progress the same way. So if we jump back into NSX, System, Fabric, Nodes, I'll select the vCenter. And this time you'll see here it says networking and security. In the security only one, it said security only and it was a green label, much of a muchness. And here it's installing. So let's let that finish its process and we'll verify that it's actually got TEPs this time around. Okay, according to this, the hosts are now prepared. So that should mean that the VIBs are installed and they have at minimum TEP interfaces configured on VLAN 2001 with DHCP or addresses assigned via DHCP. So we can confirm that. I'm going to jump into the UI and have a quick look at it. I do like to verify things as they happen, not just take what's given face value on the UI. So let's have a look at what the nodes say. Okay, cool. They're all successfully installed, but straight away what I see is a 169 address given for the TEP interfaces. Now, that shouldn't be the case because I know for a fact that the VLANs are properly plumbed. There is a helper address pointing to the DHCP server because other hosts are working. And you can do your own confirmation in your own lab, but I won't go into the network troubleshooting. And it's funny because I also wanted to keep a specific troubleshooting section, but looks like we're going to have to do some here. So the first thing I'm going to do is have a look at the profile that's been applied, because here I can see it's got a transport node profile applied to the cluster. And let's just click on it because it will confirm that. So yep, it's definitely applied. So I'll hit cancel on that. Let's have a look at the transport node profile by clicking on profiles. Go to transport node profiles and I'm going to hit edit here. Okay, so we can see it's been prepped with VDS. It's got a VLAN and overlay transport zone. It's been attached to the VDS. It's been given this uplink profile, which we'll have to check to make sure that, because that's where you would tag the overlay VLAN. So I'll check that next. It's marked as DHCP and 2 uplinks. So the next thing I'm going to do is go and have a look at this profile. So NSX Edge multiple VTEPs uplink profile. So cancel that. Uplink profiles. NSX Edge multiple VTEPs uplink profile. So there it is. It's one of the default ones. It's got 2 uplinks assigned to it. Load balance source, but straight away we can see here there are no transport VLANs. So that's why it's getting a 169 address. It's not actually hitting the right VLAN and then the helper to get the DHCP address from the server. And you're not actually able to edit these because they're default baked in profiles, but you can see here for sure 0 for transport VLAN. So that's not going to work. So what I will probably need to do is create my own transport profile, or uplink profile I should say, and which is a bit disappointing because you would hope that this works off the bat. So let me just quickly do that now. Okay, so I've just done this quickly, gave it a name. The teaming policy that I want to use, it's load balance source with 2 active uplinks because that's how many NICs I've got, and transport VLAN is put in. So I'll hit add on that. Cool, that is now saved. I will jump back into transport node profiles. I'll edit this one and let's see if it will allow me to. Yep, so it looks like it will. I'll change it to the profile that I just created and we'll have to scroll down and remap these uplinks. So I'll do that, hit save. that should automatically go and push the config to the data plane or the nodes. So if I jump back into here, let's see what's going on. Nope, has not applied yet. Okay, so that's applied, and we can see this time around there are tunnel endpoint addresses which aren't 169 addresses. Full disclosure, I found it easier to go into profiles, transport node profiles, delete this one and recreate it with the same settings but with the right uplinks, because I found editing the previous one got applied the first uplink, but the second one remained blank no matter what I did. And also, when then applying profiles to the profile to the nodes, it didn't take and didn't update. So it was just easy to remove the VIBs, delete the profile, and recreate. You can feel it's fine to do so because it doesn't save this stuff in a database anywhere. vCenter's just orchestrated this the first time around with all the information you've supplied. So you can just recreate it. It's not locked down or anything like that. Okay, cool. So now we can continue on, knowing that that's all configured. Actually, just quickly while we're there, we could probably double check on the host to make sure. Okay. Just make that bigger. All right, cool. So we've got 2 tap addresses there. I'm not sure why it's created 4 interfaces though. Let's have a look at one of the other hosts, see if it's done it to all of them. So this one's fine. I'm wondering if it's just some kind of bug. Let's have a look at something in the UI. Okay, so it's got 2 applied here. Interesting. So one of the 3 hosts has been applied with 2 magically extra VM kernel adapters for TEP interfaces, but they've got 169 addresses because they haven't been mapped correctly due to the profile. This may or may not happen in your environment. I'll continue on, but that is another thing to be on the lookout for. If you do hit the same issue, let me know and I'll see what I can figure out for you, but it shouldn't be too hard to fix. Okay, so I'm going to move on. All right, so similar sort of setup. We have to now create interfaces for the edges. So I'm going to do this. The management is correct. The VLAN for the edge transport or the TEP for the edges. And then I'll put in the TEP details. Okay. As you can see, I've done this before, which is why it's pre-populated, but mimic this in your environment or use whatever VLAN and address details you want to do in your environment. It shouldn't be too dissimilar. I'll hit next. I'm going to fill out all this information and then I'll come back and scroll through and show everyone what I've done. Okay, so I've given it a name, an FQDN, IP address, and then there's a little checkbox there to apply the same settings for all edges. And this is for the virtual machine size. So I've gone with a medium, so it will apply medium to the second edge as well. Pick the data store. Scroll down. And then a management network and external connectivity, which is the same port group, similar to previous versions if you've ever used NSX before, but your TEPs will be using this, peering for BGP or uplink to the physical network, and anything else you want to use that trunk port group for. So just make sure that edge uplink or whatever uplink port group you use there is a trunking port group, as it says in the little message down below as well. So I'll hit next, and I'll repeat the same, adding name, putting all the details in for the second edge node, and then we'll continue on. Okay, so all those details are now filled in. If I expand this out, you'll see the same settings. So for storage, uplink, and size for the VM, and then password. It'll mimic essentially what the last one had because we checked that box. So I'll click on deploy edge, and that will deploy both edges with the configuration that it sees here. Okay, let's let that go and come back. Oh, we've got an error. So Minimum of 2 free IP addresses required for edge deployment. Okay, what is that referring to? The only thing I can think of are the TEPs, but there are plenty there. I might just bump that up to see if that helps. Okay, let's see. Interesting. I'm going to try and work out what this is now. Well, it's prompted with an error, but it still seems to be deploying the edges. So I'm going to sit on this and let it deploy and see what happens. Then we'll come back to it. Okay, according to the UI, the edges have been deployed. So I've actually done a ping test prior to seeing this screen, and we can see they're responding on the management NIC. Let's have a quick look in NSX. Cool, so both edges are there registered and also have TEP address or a TEP address created on them, or interface I should say, which is not ideal. I would have rather 2 TEP interfaces, but you didn't really get the choice. Plus you would have also seen when we did the deployment, we had a single uplink interface. So let's push on and see what we get out of this, and then we'll probably have to go back in and fix that. So I'll hit next. Okay, would you like to peer with the physical router now? I will say yes because mine's ready to go, so I'll hit yes, but you don't have to if you don't want to. So here I'll create my local AS. My remote AS should be, I think it's 6560. I'll just double check that quickly. Yep, that is correct. Cool. I have 2 routers, so I'll fill all this out and we'll come back to it. Okay, so I've filled all that out. So my local AS is, so this is on the T0, 65,060, and then I'll put in the BGP neighbor address and remote AS. So I'll hit next. Okay, this is, give it a name. I'm just going to call it Impactor. So it should prefix the name. There you go, as you can see on the right hand side. Prefix the name with T0 on the end. And here we'll do the uplink VLAN IDs. So I've got 50 and 51. I'll hit next. And here we'll put in the address details. So 10, 50, 0, 100. Okay, let me just have a look at. Okay, it wants it to be insider, so I'll just do that. Alright, so as we can see here, this is what it's doing. It's creating 2 uplink interfaces, one being 1050.0.100 and 1050.1.0.100, one to each router. And it looks as though what it's going to do is give 1 uplink to each edge node as opposed to having a full mesh or 2 uplinks per edge node. So let's do this and see what happens. Okay, so it says the gateway config was successful. I'll hit next. And here's the ability to create a segment. So I'm just going to call it Impactor. And we'll give it an address. So something that doesn't overlap in your environment. It also wants a range. So maybe I'll do... And then we'll do the default gateway. And it wants an insider as well. Okay, cool. I don't know why it wants a range, but let's see. It may add a DHCP, but we'll find out soon enough. You can add multiple segments here if you want to. I'm just going to do one as an example. So I'll hit create segment. Cool, that's apparently been created. You can add NAT rules off the bat if you want to as well. I'm not going to bother with that, so I'll hit finish. And it says we are done. Let's have a look and see what it's created. So we already know that there's 2 edges with a single TEP address, so it needs to be fixed. If I jump into networking and go to T0 gateway, apparently it's down. I wonder why, but everything is up. All transport nodes are okay. I wonder if that's just a red herring and it will clear up. We'll leave that for now, but let's have a look to see what it did with the gateway itself. So it's enabled BGP, it's successfully put in the right AS, it's put in 2 peers, both peers are down. I'll do some testing with that. It hasn't enabled InterSR. It's configured it as active standby. So some of this stuff may not be desired. But again, there's nothing stopping you from changing it to suit your requirements. So I'll hit close on this. Let's see what it's done for tier 1. It's created the tier 1, also an active standby, which I would suggest is, yep, it's also got the edge cluster configured, which may not be ideal for everyone. Go to segments, and there's the segment created as well and plumbed in, attached to the overlay segment, plumbed into the tier 1 gateway. Okay, so now let's work backwards and see why things are down. First thing I'm going to do is putty onto one of the edge nodes. Oh, didn't like the password. Okay, now let's see the logical routers. Okay, I want VRF1 because that's the, oh no, sorry, I want VRF3 because that's the T0 SR. I'm going to check its interfaces. Let's see if it did have the interface created on it. Okay, so there is one of the uplinks, and as I imagined, or as I thought, it's only got one, which means 10.50.10.100 is on edge node 2. So what I'm going to try to do now is ping 10.50.01, which is the next, or the BGP peer, and I'll do it from the source, 10.50.0100. That is not a good sign. It should actually be working, so let me see why. First thing I'm going to do is check my uplink port group that I had attached to the edge node. So uplink 1, what is it doing? Oops, sorry, I want that. So it's a trunking port group, so that's fine, that's good. The other thing it could be is VLAN's plumbed to the host, so I'm going to check that now. I'll come back. Okay, so let's have a look to see which way this uplink is going. That would be under teaming and failover, so active uplink is uplink 2. Now let's work backwards and see where uplink 2 should be going. No, that's not even the right switch. Oh, that's my mistake. Okay, I see what's happened. I have got 2 VDSs. However, the one that I picked was one that I previously configured and then ripped everything out and put into the second VDS. So if I recreate those uplink port groups and attach it to the right VDS, this should start working. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that and come back to the video. Okay, so I have remapped the edge uplink interface for the first edge. Let's see, I'll just quickly show. There we go, so that's a new one. The last one was called edge uplink 1. This one's just edge up 1. It's also a trunking port group. And the other important thing to note is, and the other thing that I realized was, it attached both edge nodes to the same uplink interface, or port group I should say. If you need to tell it which switch to go to and you've only got one active, the other one standby, it's not actually going to work because it's going to send all the traffic to one switch or the uplink that it doesn't need to go to even for the second edge. So I might fix that up as well. So let me have a quick look at this first to make sure it's up and running. So if I jump back in, okay, so that ping is now successful. That is good. Now I'll quickly remap the second edge node. And let's go edge up 2. Cool. All right, I'm going to putty onto the second edge node now. The VRF should be the same, but I'm just going to quickly check. Yep, VRF3. Int. Now it should have the 1051 address. Yep, there it is. All right, now let's try pinging the gateway. Perfect. Okay, so that's all good. Now, in theory, the neighbor should be up. So one is this. So this is well, not intended, but this is what I suspected. One is up because it only has one interface, whereas normally you usually would probably create an edge uplink or two uplink interfaces on the edge. So you can go and fix that if you know what you're doing, or leave it as is. Either way, it will work. But I tend to like to have both, but I won't bother doing it in this video. Okay, so now if I jump back into NSX, it should come good. Yep, there you go, successful. Edit that. And both peers are up. Okay, cool. So now that concludes the deployment of the network model. I do have a troubleshooting section at the end of this video, but it's more about what happens if the plugin in the mob gets removed. How do you fix that? So I will get to that in the next section, but I won't go into creating the other uplink interfaces and refining the active standby and all that sort of stuff. You can go and have fun with that on your own. So I briefly touched on some troubleshooting tips throughout the video. In this specific section, I'm going to give you some tips about this whole NSX-E or vSphere integration plugin, and as well as show you what happens with certain situations with the plugin is if it's removed, essentially. So first things first, I did show you this before, but have a look. If we go into the mob, we will be able to see the extension for the plugin. Okay, so if I extend this out, so this is the plugin. You can see by the version, the name. So I'll quickly copy that, and we'll go back one step, and I'll actually remove the plugin. So this could happen various ways in your environment. It could be someone's accidentally removed it, some sort of orchestration tool has removed it, something's been corrupted, and so on. There's a number of ways this issue could arise, but I'll specifically invoke the removal of this, and we'll see what happens. So if I click on this and invoke, we'll get a void, and straight away, refresh browser because the plugin has been removed. Now, let that refresh. Okay, so we've got, see, notice now that that is no longer highlighted. If I click on it, it wants you to install it again. This doesn't mean anything has changed in NSX-T. We've still got all the deployment that we've done and all that sort of stuff, so you don't need to fear that if something happens to the plugin, then you lose anything in NSX. That's not the case, but there is a quick and easy fix for this. If we go to System, Fabric, Nodes, then I will go to, System, Fabric, Compute Manager, not Nodes. And then I'll go and edit the VC link one that it integrated. And then I will edit the FQD and IP address. And here I'll put in the account for my vCenter, which is just going to be administrated vSphere.local. Okay, I've filled in those details. And earlier on in the video, I mentioned something about the reverse proxy port B, and this is where it comes in handy. If you use the OVA, this port will be set to 0 as opposed to 443, which is what you set in the OVF files that you deploy with. So something important in case this situation doesn't occur for some reason in your lab, this is how you overcome it. So if I hit save here, this will re-register the plugin. And if I jump back here, straight away, it says it's been successfully deployed. If I refresh, that will come good again. There we go, it's back, and it doesn't think there's no configuration. So if I go into networks, everything will exist. So it's a like-for-like environment. So that pretty much concludes this video, but I did want to highlight that and stress the fact that this deployment or NSX-E or vSphere integration is greenfield only. You can't take a 3 or an upgraded environment or whatever it is that's not 3.2 or later and achieve this same integration. It's because there is a specific set of workflow and scripts that exist in the OVA and OVF that allow this integration to occur and deploy that plugin. So keep in mind, greenfield only. You cannot upgrade and expect this to happen in your upgraded to 3.2 environment. Thanks.